It's great to see you. It's a great privilege and an honor for you to be at the national finals, and I congratulate you for making it, and particularly under our challenging circumstances, but I can see that challenging circumstances are not much of a challenge for you. So you'll do a really great job. And I'm Donald Rogers. I teach history at Central Connecticut State University. I've been involved in We the People for many years, and I know it's a very competitive competition, and I know that you've got to be a really good team to be here. So.
Good afternoon. I'm Dan Taubman. I'm a senior judge on the Colorado Court of Appeals in Denver, Colorado, and I too congratulate you for winning your state competition, and we look forward to hearing from you. And I know particularly, I don't know if that's your teacher, but Mr. Gainey is standing in front of Mount Rushmore, which adds a note of historical interest and color to your presentation.
Greetings, everybody. I'm Dave Adler. I'm president of the Alturas Institute and on the law faculty at University of Idaho. It's been a pleasure to work with students over the years at the national finals, and I want to add my congratulations to your high achievement for making it to the We the People National Finals Challenge. And looking forward to the great conversation we're going to have with you today.
So we would like you to introduce each of yourselves and your teacher. And when you introduce yourselves, tell us one thing that you were doing before the coronavirus disrupted our lives.
All right, well, I suppose I'll start. My name is Tristan Olson, and before the quarantine started, I was practicing my cello, which thankfully is something I can still do from home.
Do you want to go or me?
You can go.
Okay. Hi, my name is Lexi McElroy. Before the virus hit, I was basically just trying to enjoy my senior year, I guess, with my friends. But that's about it for me.
Hi, my name's Katie O'Shea. And something I was doing before the coronavirus hit was participating in the musical at my high school. And actually, Tristan Olson and I both had gotten leads in the musical. So that was something we were preparing for. And it was a lot of fun. So, and our teacher is Mr. Gainey, Patrick Gainey, and he teaches our constitutional government class at Spearfish High School.
Very good. Mr. Gainey, you fit right in with the statues behind you.
Thank you.
So we're going to share with you question number 3 from Unit 4 and remind you what it's about, and then we'll look forward to hearing your remarks. Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution provides that state legislatures can determine the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives, yet gives Congress the power to make or alter such regulations. What are the advantages and disadvantages of a uniform election process? And what responsibility do state legislatures, state election officials, and citizens have in maintaining free and fair elections? And finally, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the trustee and delegate theories of representation as they apply to congressional districts? You may proceed.
In regards to free and fair elections, there are both advantages and disadvantages to a uniform election process. One advantage of the uniform process is that it prevents chaos in the voting system by forcing everyone to follow the same guidelines and rules. One example of the need for a uniform election process is the 2000 presidential election. The entire election was dependent on who won Florida's closely contended votes. The recount was decided by such a slim margin that otherwise insignificant discrepancies, like confusing butterfly ballots and punch cards with hanging chads, became major issues. If the election was uniform, these issues could have been avoided.
However, there are several disadvantages to a uniform election process. First, a state's population, especially in respect to its size and its available resources, is a major factor that affects the election process. Here in South Dakota, we can vote on election day with nothing more than a 15-minute wait. However, in larger cities, voting lines can span several blocks. This is in conjunction with the differing amounts of resources available, may make implementing a uniform process more trouble than it's worth. However, the advent of technology in the voting may make securing a uniform system easier the more technology that is implemented.
Another disadvantage of the uniform process is that the decided method may not be flexible enough to handle extraneous circumstances. Wisconsin is currently facing troubles with their voting system in the face of the current global pandemic. During Wisconsin's spring election, many people did not want to leave the safety of their homes to vote due to COVID-19. Some people braved the COVID storm, but the overall voting turnout was still 13% less than 2016's election. Issues with receiving absentee ballots on time or even at all were also present. On top of that, Milwaukee, Wisconsin went from 180 polling stations to 5 during the spring election. Some people saw this as an attempt to prevent the spread of COVID-19, while others saw this as a political endeavor to suppress the vote.
When looking to uphold fair, free, and frequent elections, state legislators, state election officials, and citizens have their own responsibilities for the voting process. The state legislators are not only responsible for writing laws that establish and maintain elections, but for overseeing state officials and ensuring that they obey said laws. The state election officials are responsible for making voting stations easily accessible to the public, as well as overseeing other minutiae of the voting process. The responsibilities of the citizens in maintaining fair elections are pretty straightforward. They include registering to vote as well as going out and actually voting.
The role of elected representatives boils down to two schools of thought. The trustee theory favors the idea that elected representatives should have full autonomy, as they're deemed more trustworthy than the public, and have a duty to make decisions on the behalf of their constituents. The delegate theory of representation, conversely, dictates that elected representatives should serve as a voice for the public and have little to no autonomy. Those in favor of this theory believe that the representatives can best represent and serve their constituents by mirroring them, guaranteeing that the constituents' ideas are fully represented.
In regards to congressional districts, both of these models have their strengths and flaws. Under the trustee system, representatives have a broader context to governmental issues and can make more educated decisions than the public could. On the other hand, this means they can choose to ignore their constituents, circumventing the very idea of American democracy in the name of the nation. The delegate theory disallows any of this heinous discretion, ensuring that the public is heard. That is, if politics doesn't interfere like it usually does. Under the delegate system, representatives would likely reflect the interests of the loudest voice in a congressional district, be that a large business or a wealthy sponsor, rather than all of the voices.
A total lack of discretion in regards to serving the interests of the constituents also has its share of troubles. Would it be the duty of the delegate to suppress the votes in order to benefit their constituents politically?
Of course, the government isn't this black and white. The proper representative system is a balancing act between these two theories, ensuring that both the interests of the people and the nation are observed. We're ready to take your questions.
Very good. Thank you for a very nice systematic presentation. Thinking about Article 1, Section 4, could you comment on how broad the authority is that that section gives to Congress and how Congress has exercised that authority over the course of the past 200 years?
I guess starting out, I would say that yes, we definitely see within the Constitution very much a lot of ambiguity in regards to defining terms and the specifics of what that needs to look like in regards to elections and laying that out. And obviously they give a lot of power to the state legislatures because so many people, when the Constitution was first written, were concerned about states having their own rights. And so that was the struggle but, with federalism, basically, with how much power should the federal government have versus what power do the states need to have. And so I think that's why in Article 1 and Section 4, they really give, you know, a lot of power to the state legislatures to establish what those elections are going to look like, but they also give Congress the power to kind of check the state's power to say, okay, Congress can step in and say, we don't want you running the elections this way.
And I think that how open to interpretation everything is in our Constitution, it's very hard to decipher things, like Katie said. One of the biggest problems that we're facing right now is the whole coronavirus and people wanting to go out and vote, but they can't. They don't know who definitely has the power to change the voting date, if they even have the power to change a voting date. A lot of places like Baltimore and Wisconsin are right now facing issues with their absentee ballots, saying that they sent them out, but only certain people got them. Some people in the household, there was only 2 people who got them out of 5. So it really isn't working what's going on right now, but no one knows who has the direct power to change the date.
I'd like to follow up on Professor Rogers' question and ask you if you can share with us some examples of federal legislation that Congress has enacted under Article 1, Section 4, and to what extent you think that those have been successful in achieving free and fair elections.
I do not know any specific legislation that has been passed on it. I do know that they're trying to take strides in making it a more uniformed election process than what they already have. But I do not know any direct examples. I just know that they are working to have a better system than what they have in place, given the 2001 election and how messy that was.
When you ask that, are you speaking into specifically laws passed by state legislatures or by the federal government in regards to the election?
I was asking about laws passed by the federal government.
By the federal government, okay. Several acts that I guess I think of are the Voting Rights Acts in the 60s and 70s during President Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency and also President Nixon. And I know both of them signed several of those acts in regards to like many African Americans and basically people of minorities at that time that were still being suppressed by the state legislators in regards to voting, because obviously we had the civil rights amendments that gave them the right to vote. But even after that, there were still state legislatures, especially in the South, that were trying to prevent them from voting. And so, yeah, so in regards to that, those were a couple examples of presidents who passed acts to help that.
Piggybacking off of Katie's answer, I feel like, especially with the civil rights movement and that example in the 60s, that even though there were great strides taken in providing more equal votes for everyone and having not polling stations, but voting stations up and ready to go. And there were several independent groups that were doing that during that time. But I feel like a lot of the de facto segregation in that era prevented a lot of that from happening. And I feel like while it was a very powerful thing to be done in order to secure more free voting, there isn't anything that could have been done to wholly solve the problem by the national legislature.
As a follow-up to that, in your view, are there still some groups in society that have been disenfranchised or might be disenfranchised, let's say, by current circumstances, including the COVID virus?
I know that Milwaukee is currently facing troubles with that because of how many polling stations. They went down from 180, I believe, to 5. And people can see that as discrimination for where they had the polling stations located at, because they only have them at one central area compared to spread out everywhere. That could be an example of showing that a group has been discriminated against, in a sense.
I feel like lower income people also maybe in some regard disenfranchised because, again, we don't really have this problem in South Dakota, and with our small towns everywhere, voting really isn't an issue. But in a big metropolitan area, like a large city, people have to wait for hours on end to vote, and that can require that people take work off to vote. And I feel like that is a great letdown because voting is one of the things that our country holds dearest, yet some people just cannot afford to do so.
That's time.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you very much. That was a very nice presentation. We're going to give you some comments now, a lot of compliments and a few suggestions.
Sure.
I thought you did a really good job touching the bases on each part of the question. You said a lot about the problem of uniformity versus diversity. And I really think you really developed the Milwaukee example again and again. And I think it's good because it demonstrates the problems of administrating elections on the local level. And I think you give very compelling statistics of the downturn in voter turnout in that area. And you might have added, in response to Professor Adler's question, who did it discriminate against? Which mainly low-income minority voters who lost their voting rights because of that decrease in polling stations in Milwaukee. I thought you had a really great opening that you didn't quite take advantage of. And this was in mentioning of the fiasco in the 2000 election with the different kinds of ballots, in Florida, the hanging chads and that kind of problem. And one might have thought that congressional legislation could have set a standard that we wouldn't have a problematic ballots like that. What that creates an opening for is, well, how did Congress respond to that? It was largely in response to that Congress passed the Help America Vote Act, which set standards, and provided some help to the states to improve their election process. So there was an opening where you could have gotten on to legislation that Congress has enacted. Very good insights, good examples, and I enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. Can you all see me? Because I can't see anybody right now on my computer.
Oh,
Yeah,
we
can see you.
Kayla, is there something that I can do to get my pictures back on my screen?
Yeah, let's go ahead and give feedback, and then I will meet you in the breakout room after this hearing and we can fix that.
Okay, thanks. So let me give my comments. I agree with Professor Rogers that your discussion of the issues surrounding the 2000 presidential election were good. I would have liked you to have mentioned the Bush v. Gore case that the United States Supreme Court decided to resolve that election. I think that would have been helpful to mention. I did like very much that when you're discussing the need for uniformity or the need for flexibility in elections, that you mentioned technology, because I think that's an important issue that will become increasingly important in the future. And so I was very glad to see that you mentioned that. When you discussed the trustee versus the delegate theory, you said that what we really need, given the practical circumstances, is a balancing act. And I think that's a very good point. Some people have described that as the political theory, which is something that you might have mentioned. And then when I asked you about federal legislation involving voting rights, you did mention the Voting Rights Act, which is good, but there have been some other statutes, federal statutes that have been enacted, like the Motor Voter Law and the Help America Vote Act, which you might have mentioned also, that would have strengthened your presentation. At the same time, in response to Professor Adler's questions about difficulties, you mentioned the reduction in polling places in Milwaukee, which I think was a very good example that you included. So overall, I think you did a very nice job, and I congratulate you on your presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I share my colleagues' appraisal of your performance. I enjoyed it very much. I too was excited in your opening statements when you made reference to the 2000 election. And I thought you were going to use that as an example to talk a little bit about Bush versus Gore, even talk a little bit about the willingness or unwillingness of the judiciary to enter this realm. But you have to make choices about what you're going to do. I also did enjoy your response to my question about whether some groups are disenfranchised. It was an excellent point to mention polling discrimination, which in fact may loom larger in future election. I think you alluded to the problems in Milwaukee, for example. In light of the COVID virus, that seems to be almost a given in November. And the question is what will the response be? Who will respond? And when you talk about citizen responsibility to ensure free and fair elections, that would certainly be an opportunity for citizens to speak up to ensure that there is an adequate number of polling places. I think when you were addressing that, you might also have referred to voting discrimination against Native Americans, for example, in your own native state, and you could have mentioned felons. But overall, I think you did a nice job. It's not an easy question to address in a timely manner. So I want to say that you were well trained, and that's really a credit to your teacher as well. Thank you. Good luck the rest of the way.
Let's give applause for the teacher and for the students. Good job.
Okay.
Very good. Good job.
Good luck. Take
Thank
care.